Hello and welcome to another in our occasional series of conversations. This time I'm in conversation with Raymond Arroyo. Raymond is well known internationally as a broadcaster and as an author, and he's the news anchor with EWTN, the Global Catholic Television Network. Raymond, you're very welcome.
Oh, thank you. Delighted to be here now.
Thank you. The Worldpriest organisation endeavours to help and support priests throughout the world in various ways. And in fact, one of our projects, the Global Rosary Relay, we are in partnership with EWTN.
So I'm told.
Yeah, and we're very pleased with that, and we're very grateful to EWTN to put their services at our disposal, which is wonderful. So obviously, because this is a Worldpriest TV, I want to talk about priesthood. But before we get to that, maybe a little bit about yourself in terms of how did you get into broadcasting in the first place?
No, it's a long story. I'll give you the abbreviated version. I was in the theater initially. I wanted to study theater, the classics, and there was a very renowned acting teacher in New York. Her name was Stella Adler. And Stella trained Marlon Brando and Judy Garland and, I mean, everybody, John Ritter to Robert De Niro. And she was this magnificent sort of Old Testament figure. And I desperately wanted to study with her. And I had studied and went to an arts high school in New Orleans. But Stella was the only thing I could see when college came around. So I auditioned, ended up getting into New York University, and they had a program in affiliation with Stella's studio. I ended up not only studying with her, I was her last class. She was 90 years old when I studied with her, but sharp as a tack, an amazing acting teacher. And then I toured the United States. I even worked here for a little bit in the UK. I was acting, I was directing. And then I got tired of it. I got tired of the roles I was being cast in. I got tired of the lifestyle. And so a casting agent friend of mine directed me toward writing, and I ended up starting at the Associated Press in New York and went on to write for the political columnist team of Evans and Novak in Washington, and then one thing led to another, and I ended up as a Capitol Hill correspondent on American television, American cable television. And then someone asked me if I would write a piece, because they knew I had a print background as well as a television background, and they asked if I would write a piece about this nun in Birmingham, Alabama, who had founded a television network. And I did. And that's how Mother Angelica and I met. And she said, I'm starting a news operation. Why don't you come down here and start it with me?
Excellent.
And we did.
Right. So the writing came first?
Yeah, well, no, actually the acting came first. But I would say the writing is really I think an overflow of my acting training and my sense of the theater. I write with a specific audience in mind, and I'm now writing fiction for the first time, which is a very difficult thing. I don't recommend it. It takes an enormous amount of time. You're living with these characters in your head, and you're playing all the roles. The reason I could write something like Mother Angelica's biography, having never really written a book before, was because of that acting background. It permitted me to sort of get into those characters, and I knew how to dramatically set the story off.
Excellent. You've interviewed very many people, both lay and clerical and leaders and so on. And of course there's that famous interview with Cardinal Ratzinger before he became Pope.
Right.
And I believe I'm correct in saying that was the only English language interview that he did?
It is, yeah. That's the only English language interview he did, an extended interview, and it almost didn't happen. That interview was initially for a book he had just written.
Right.
What was the name of the book? Something in the World. I can't remember the name of the book. But and I had been writing him for years. I'd known him before that. But I'd been writing him for years, asking for an interview, and he would never grant it. Right. So the book came around. We saw that as a good opportunity to do the interview, but he wanted to do it in German. So I had a translator with me. And we were about to start the interview, and I said, Your Eminence, can I speak with you for a moment? He said, yes, come into the office. We went into his office, we sat down. And he said, now what shall we talk about? I said, now, Professor, you don't give your students, I know, all the answers to the questions. You just give them a general idea of the themes. so the themes. What themes are we to talk about? I gave him the themes. And then I said, would you mind, I know your English is fine, would you mind doing 2 or 3 questions in English? And he said, you mean the first ones? I said, yeah, 2 or 3 right at the top. Yes, I think we could do that. And he ended up doing the whole thing in English. We never used the translator. For one moment, he lapsed into Italian because he was quoting the scriptures. But other than that, he went all the way. And he is, as he was there, delightful and fun. I think his sense of humor came through in that interview, which I'm very proud of. He really let his guard down. Yeah. So yeah, it was quite a moment.
I found too, I only met him once and quite briefly, but I find, I mean, for an extraordinary mind, an extraordinary intellect, that he had the ability on occasion to talk in a language which the ordinary person could understand.
Yes, he was very
which for
practical.
somebody, for somebody so powerfully intellectual, that's a wonderful thing to be able to do.
It was an intimidating interview to do. I have to tell you, I fretted about it going in because you do have this monumental mind, one of the world's greatest theologians, and you just don't know quite what you're going to, what you're going to encounter in the process. So I read as much as I could get my hands on that he had written. And we talked generally, and many of the things we talked about became hallmarks of his pontificate. His love of the old Mass, the sex abuse scandal, so many things that we got into. Vocations, the new springtime, his vision for the future of the church. All of those things ended up being prophetic when I look at them now.
Last year I spoke with Bishop Frank Caggiano of Brooklyn, and he was telling me about the U.S. Bishop's initiative, Fortnight for Freedom.
Yes.
And I understand it's happening again now this year, maybe quite shortly. Do you think it's having any impact?
Well, I think it's having an impact among some Catholics. The bishops have done a good job trying to not only raise awareness for the cause of religious freedom, which is under attack from in various ways. But I think they have tried to galvanize the Catholic community and educate them on the various dimensions of this problem. Whether it's effective or not, I will only know in time. But certainly, I think they are attempting to do something. My recommendation to them last time is to have a single event, a single march. But the bishops are sort of committed to this fortnight, these 2 weeks of raising awareness. The problem in the context of the United States, I would dare say in the context of Ireland as well, when you stretch something out over 2 weeks, you run the risk of losing people's attention. And without a central event, a central moment, I think it's very hard for them to focus on it or know what it is. But the prayers go on. There are amazing efforts happening, particularly in individual dioceses. And we're a big country. It's hard to get the whole country sort of moving in one direction and focusing on one thing, even as a church. But they're trying.
And what's practice like among Catholics, attending Mass on a Sunday and so on?
It is, last time I checked, I want to say it's 40%, something like that, near 40% of Catholics who are really engaged. But this is the challenge, I think, for the Church, to remind Catholics of the importance of the sacraments, the central importance of Mass each week. Because of the media, because of the immediacy of the technology we all carry with us, I think it's a harder case to make today than it was just a few decades ago. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't make the case. In another way of looking at it, if you look at it from the other angle, it's an easier case because everything is so immediate, everything is so disposable, everything is so quick. To have a moment of transcendence, a moment where you touch God physically, spiritually and otherwise, that should be part of the sales pitch, and I don't know if it often is. Taking part in something far bigger than yourself and far more important than just about anything else you'll do in the course of that day, maybe that week. But I think we've lost our sense of the mystical, we've lost the supernatural. And it has a way of coming back and reminding us that it's there. But I think in the day-to-day practice, it's a hard pitch.
Turning to priesthood, you have interviewed many priests
I have.
from a variety of countries with a variety of ministries.
Yeah.
I get the feeling that you're in possibly quite a unique position as a layman, having interviewed so many priests, and being a layman, there's an objectivity there,
Yes, that's
if
true.
you like.
That's true.
And I just wonder what you think of what do you think is the, if I can use the term, the state of priesthood or the morale of priests today. How do you find it?
Well, I'll say this. I think the morale among priests is not all that high right now, to be candid. I speak with a lot of priests. I'm friends with a lot of priests. And as you said, because of my unique position, it's this odd place where they see me as, a part of the club, but I'm really not in the club. So I guess because of that, I am privy to things that the layman normally doesn't see. I see depressed priests. I talk to priests who feel very alone, particularly diocesan priests who feel isolated. We have to do something, it seems to me, to make sure that this sense of fraternity is returned to the priesthood. I think priests in ordered ministries, those who are part of the Franciscans or the Dominicans, they fare better because they're in communal life. Their failings as well as their great gifts can be fully protected and exploited in the community, and they're safe. There's home. I think for a diocesan priest, they feel a bit alienated from their fellow priests as well as from the laity. They're betwixt and between. I love what the Pope said. Francis has said. He's spoken about the careerism in the priesthood and how that has to stop. He has sort of called out clericalism. I think that we have to listen to those warnings. But there's clearly, in the formation as well as in the day-to-day living of a priest, particularly a diocesan priest, I think the bishops have to reflect more keenly on how do we make and create a safe harbor for these men so that they can fully live out their ministry, be the gift that they're called to be to the church, and yet not feel quite so alone. I think the being alone is a great temptation and a great black mark on the priesthood today.
Yes. Yeah,
it's not good for them.
No, it's not.
Not good for any man
not.
to be alone.
It's not.
Just not.
It's not. And to some extent, even the seminary training, where I won't say you're locked up, but certainly you spend a considerable proportion of 7 years interned,
right?
And then you're let loose, and you're supposed to be able to be a social animal.
That's exactly right. All of a sudden,
all
of a sudden, and I think it's hard. I think it's very difficult. I've been a big proponent in the case of the United States, anyway, of having priests, before they go into regular ministry, maybe during their seminary training, to spend time as a chaplain with the military. Because what I've learned in interviewing a lot of military men, the sense of fraternity that they learn, being in close quarters under intense situations, in wartime situations at times, it breeds a certain friendship, love, devotion that is healthy, that is, as I said, a solid fraternity. We need that in the priesthood today. There isn't enough of it. Priests live very isolated lives. Or they fall into little cliques with a group of laity. That's not good either. They need good friendships inside and outside of the clergy, and those bonds have to run deep. We need that as people.
Seminary training has been sort of under the microscope quite a bit in recent times, and I don't really want to get into that.
Sure.
But I'm just wondering, do you think that there is a place for ongoing clergy formation and development after ordination?
Absolutely. Well, we can all continue to learn and grow. And look, in the married life, you stumble along for the first few years. You're figuring it out with your spouse. But the difference there is at least there are two of you doing it together. The priest is, again, he's alone trying to figure this out. So ongoing training, absolutely. But we have to find ways to use the great gifts and the training that have already been given to these men in real-world applications where they can profit as well as the laity. And whether that's small group Bible studies or prayer groups that they're a part of, that they lead, we have to find those experiences, those practical moments where they're both coming into contact with the real world problems of the people in their parish, and yet they're also growing and learning, and it's a moment for them to ask questions and grow as people and as pastors as well.
Is the phenomenon of Anglican priests becoming Catholic priests causing any problems? Have you seen that at all?
Well, it's strange you ask that. We have in our parish a former archbishop, an Anglican in the United States, who converted to Catholicism. He's a grandfather, he's a father, he's a number of kids. He is in our parish as a parish priest. In fact, we love going to Mass with him. So it hasn't really caused much dislocation from the lay perspective, because you're getting amazing homilies.
Yeah.
He really understands, because of his life experience, the challenges, the difficulties that we face day to day as married people, as fathers, as mothers. So that's been fantastic. It has raised a few theological and practical discipline questions. And I've had men I know who've left the priesthood because something happened and they made a mistake and they had a child out of wedlock or something, and they still want to be part of the church. And they feel, well, I can't be. But here's a fellow who was an Anglican for all these years, and suddenly he comes in, he's welcomed with open arms, and here's his whole family, and it's perfectly fine. That is something the church is going to have to work out in time, and I'm sure it will. But it's certainly an interesting contribution, I think, to certainly in the American context, to the Catholic Church at large, because of the reverence of the liturgy, as well as the practical real-world experience that they bring to bear. But it's not many. We're not talking about many priests. We're talking about a handful. However, in the United States, whole parishes have come over, which I know is something that's happened in England as well.
Yes, not in Ireland as yet.
Not in Ireland.
Not yet.
They're holding firm.
Well, and that's why, for us, not having had the experience, some people wonder, you get an Anglican priest becoming a Catholic priest, moving in to minister in a parish with his wife and with his children, and maybe in the next door parish there's a celibate Catholic priest. And that's, in some people's minds, calling into question this whole thing about celibacy.
About the celibacy discipline. We have to remember, people, during the last conclave, I was getting so many questions from the media. I've contributed to CNN's coverage. And they kept asking me, what about celibacy? Should clergy be celibate? And I said, wait a minute. In the Eastern Church of the Catholic faith, we don't have a celibate priesthood. They can be celibate, but many aren't. It's not a discipline only in the West. So it's a discipline. It's up to the church to decide. Now, I happen to think there are practical, good, and effective reasons for that discipline. Principally, the man does not lead a divided life. He isn't caught between his wife and family and the family in the pews, the family of his parish, his spiritual family. Even Billy Graham, the worldwide evangelist, has said, the one thing I think the Catholic Church gets right, thanks a lot, Billy, is the celibacy, that there might be wisdom there, because he often felt he was cheating his own family. So I think they're practical reasons. They're good reasons for the discipline, but it's up to the church to figure out how to navigate the future, particularly now that you're bringing in priests from other faiths who are, coming home, swearing the
and
tithe.
also, I suppose, at a time when the church in many countries is facing financial difficulties, you'd have the additional difficulty of supporting the family.
Right, couldn't do it. I mean, I don't think you could do it in many cases. I mean, the priest I'm talking about who in our parish, I think he has an outside job. It's the only way he could do it. It's not, he works on the weekends with the church and he does the occasional baptism and things, but it's not, it's not the full-time avocation that it is for the priest.
Okay. I was talking last week with an elderly man, 85 years of age, who seemed to be maybe just sort of a little bit confused with the church of today as opposed to the church in his youth. He got on to the subject of the vow of poverty. Which, and you mentioned earlier about priests living in community. So the vow of poverty that those in religious orders take. And he said, if, in today's world at the moment, in the economic climate in which we live and in the financial crisis, we have a situation where there are many people who are struggling to make ends meet. and they're struggling to be able to put bread on the table for their children and so on and so forth. And in that sort of environment, you then have these priests in community who don't have to worry about where the next meal is coming from, where their clothes are coming from,
Right.
The roof over their head or their bed at night.
Right.
And he said, where's the poverty?
Well, the poverty is in that you really, in communal life, you don't have anything to call your own. I mean, yes, there's the roof over your head, there's the bed you're sleeping in. It's not your bed. It's not your roof. It's not your home. It's just not. I think there's a great sacrifice in communal life, and I've spent a lot of time near Franciscans, particularly, I was a knight of Mount St. Sepulchre at the Franciscan Monastery in Washington, which trains all of the men who go to the Holy Land. So I've seen up close the sacrifices they make. They're in a little room. They're in a, I mean, now, are they out on the street? No. But poverty, certainly in the context of we Western countries, poverty is really a spirit lived, and it is being one and at one with the poor. It doesn't mean, you know, rolling around in the corner. I mean, even Mother Teresa lived in the house. She didn't live in the gutter with the homeless that she served. But again, nothing was hers. It was all given away. And it is that spirit of giving, that spirit of endless sacrifice that I think embodies poverty and living poverty, particularly as a religious. Yeah. So I think your friend might be a little off in his perspective.
I thought so too, and I also made the point that there is the poverty of the lack of independence. You know, I mean, you can't really do very much without your superior's permission.
That's exactly right.
You know, so you're bending your will to
well,
somebody
and that's
else.
what I think. The diocesan priesthood is something other. I mean, I know priests who drive around Mercedes and live in pretty nice things and have summer homes. I'm not sure about that, to be honest with you. I don't think that's such a good thing for a priest, for anybody, but particularly for a priest. Not that you deny a priest recreation, because none of us would, but I think living in a luxurious state apart from your people, I think is not good for a vocation. I won't say this. I'll let Pope Francis say it. He had that wonderful line recently where he said, you know, we have to go out and get sheep, get the lost sheep, and we should come back smelling like those sheep when we get them. You know, we should have the smell of them because we're spending time with them, among them. And anything that I think separates us. I feel the same way, by the way, about TV personalities. We have a tendency, and I have peers who have this tendency, I've seen it. We begin to think of ourselves as living on a different plane from the people that you are speaking for. When I go in and sit opposite a president or a pope or a celebrity or whoever, I am the voice of the audience at home. I am their voice. And it's not an entitlement. It's not a crown I wear. And I think you get into real dangerous territory when you are cut off from your audience in such a way. And I think this is true for an actor, a writer, a director, anybody who deals with serving the public, serving them. You have to serve your audience. And to serve your audience, you have to know your audience. And that means spending time with them. So I try to make an effort to really talk, and social media is wonderful this way. When they don't like something, they write you right back. It's very fast. We should have this for priests. They should have written. I hated the homily. This is not the problem. Not that they would get that often. But I think that interaction is really important, not only for lay people, but for priests as well.
Okay. Well, finally, you mentioned Pope Francis, and we can't really conclude this conversation without speaking about him for a moment or two. Since his election, he has caused quite a stir in things he has said and actions which he has taken and so on, and the leadership that he has shown. How do you read this, and what are your hopes for his papacy?
It's early yet, and I agree with you. I was there the night he was elected. I was standing right out in the piazza when this all happened. And I was struck by the silence of that crowd. I have never in 18 years of covering papal events, never, and papal elections, seen a crowd so still. They didn't know what to make of him. They didn't really know who he was to begin with. He has not lost his ability to surprise. What I love about him is the blunt, straight talk that I think the world needs today. We have been blessed, particularly during the last two pontificates, with these brilliant, gifted men. One a great philosopher, the other the world-class theologian. And together they have left us such a gift of teaching. This Pope, I believe, what he's doing is unpacking that teaching. We're not going to get original teaching here from Francis. It is a pastor's heart. He speaks in a pastorly way. But what I love about it is he looks at the world and sees it exactly as it is. And he's unafraid to say, this is a lie. This talk that we use in the church, that we use in society, this sweet, honeyed talk, soft words, he called it, this is hypocrisy. And this language is, I want to get this right, it's the language of corruption, he said. The language of corruption. I love his direct, the way he frames things, and I think it's resonating with people, simple people who never gave the church a thought. So perhaps he's the Pope for this time. Well, surely he is, he's here. But I think his gifts are needed at this time. And we'll see how this plays out. I wish he spoke English, but you can't have everything.
Yesterday in the Vatican, he spoke at the inauguration of an ecclesial congress.
Yes.
And he spoke about the shepherd and leaving the 99 sheep behind to go after the one that had gone missing. And he said, for us, it's the other way around. We have the one, we need to go and seek the 99.
Oh, boy. Interesting.
Now, I believe that you do that every day of the week in your ministry of broadcasting. I thank you for that, and I thank you for our conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a delight. Thank you.